do you not realize who he played in Scream?
Right.
Matthew Lillard is very used to online gays thirsting for him in a horror movie, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not changing now.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Toast, here with a very special guest. Why don't you go and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is JonnyBlox. I do a lot of the FNAF news over on Twitter and YouTube, so I'm basically clinically online, always looking at Freddy Fazbear.
True. Honestly, so am I and like half of my audience. And the other half, maybe every other day, is looking at Freddy Fazbear.
Mm-hmm.
Really up close and personal. But as far as today's topic goes, I thought you would be a perfect person to ask this kind of question. So correct me if I'm wrong, as far as I'm aware, you've been covering FNAF news since around FNAF 6. Like, Pizzeria Simulator is, as far as I'm able to see, your content. Is that correct?
That is correct. I wouldn't quite... obviously, the news has changed over time. I think those videos were basically the Scott Games image on the screen for like 10 seconds, no commentary, but yeah, basically since FNAF 6, I've been pretty consistently covering the news.
So I thought... and yeah, I mean, look, I've unlisted a lot of my really old videos, so I get it, all right? I understand. But I figured you would be a great person to ask. Kind of like, I kind of wanted to, this is kind of a reminiscent episode. I kind of wanted to go over and talk shop about like the best and worst times for like FNAF releases and hype and like community vibes. Because I know you've been, we'll say, making the news content since FNAF 6. When did you kind of get involved in or even like participate and be in the FNAF community? Have you been like an early adopter? Was that around the same time?
Oh, yeah. Well, not around the same time as FNAF 6. My friend introduced me to FNAF 1. I haven't done the math, but I want to say like September 2014. Like very fresh off the release of FNAF 1.
Like a couple months after it came out, pretty much.
So, I mean, I've been here, and unlike most FNAF fans, I think, I've had no breaks. So it's not like FNAF 4 released, and I was gone until Sister Location, or I was gone until Security Breach. I've been in the community consistently for all those 10 years, which is very surreal to think about, but yeah.
Okay, so this will be perfect, because I'm the same way. I remember I was playing FNAF 1. We plugged our family laptop into the TV, and, like, I had a couple friends over, and we were, like, playing FNAF 1 on the TV, because we were like, what is this? Yeah, I've been in it ever since, in the sense of, like, I hadn't made, like, content about it until Security Breach's release. But I had been playing the games and like watching content of it ever since. So yeah, when I think of like, I think right now we are definitely in a very high point of the FNAF franchise.
Absolutely.
Ever since really Security Breach onward has been nothing but frequent releases of different media, general fans enjoying it. Sure, there is the vibe of like half the fandom being like, oh, I kind of wish things were back to the way they were and things like that. But no one can argue that releases and quality is up there right now in the franchise. Is there, in your mind, another point in time that kind of meets or gets close to this era of like hype and release after release after release?
I mean, I think statistically, FNAF 3 around FNAF 4 had the most like web searches around that time and most views since then. I want to say Sister Location or FNAF 3 is still like the most viewed trailer for Scott.
Yeah, that would make sense. Like just off the dome, that makes sense.
Because that's where like everyone first discovered FNAF. Those are the origins, the roots, where I'd say, you know, the franchise was still getting off the ground, but it was, since everything was releasing so fast, there was no break. There was no time to forget about FNAF.
Exactly. And also, I think right around that time is when the novels started coming out as well, which really was like, there's books now, kind of a,
Little did they know.
You're right. And I guess that also parallels with the current era we're in, where this is also when the movie comes out, and that's a whole nother realm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so crazy that, like, I have a, like, ABC Peacock account, or whatever the company that owns Peacock is, and my profile picture is Freddy Fazbear. That's
right?
wild. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere I don't know if you saw recently, but, like, the Living Tombstones FNAF 1 song just played at a baseball stadium, like a giant baseball game.
I saw that.
And it's like, everywhere you look in the mainstream, like, FNAF just keeps popping up. Like, this is definitely the most mainstream the franchise has ever been.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And it's the idea of, like, because it's kind of reminiscent of the beginning, where, like, the beginning of the franchise, it was everywhere kind of online because there were games so frequently. But now that we have, like, games, book, movie, things like that, like other medias, the releases are still just as frantic, even if the games take maybe a year or two in between now.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, I say a year or two in between, but we got Security Breach. And sure, there was a few years between Security Breach and Ruin. But we got Ruin and Help Wanted 2 in the same year, which is crazy. And Into the Pit coming probably later this year.
It's 10th
I don't know if we have any
game.
confirmed. It's a 10th anniversary game.
So
like, we don't have a confirmed date.
August, September-ish.
Hey, Scott, if you're watching, August 30th, it'd be a great birthday present. I'm just saying.
Ooh.
Actually, don't do it August 30th, because I don't want to play FNAF on my birthday. But I mean, you can. I'm going to have to play it the day it comes out, so you get to decide what my birthday plans are, Scott.
Now you have to do it on the 30th.
Right. Yeah, so, like, obviously, I know there was kind of a feeling of drought after Security Breach. Because I talked about, like, there's that year or two between Security Breach and Ruin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the dates fresh in my mind. Where we were getting books and movie news, but there wasn't, like, necessarily another game.
Mm-hmm.
What was kind of your perspective in the fandom around that time?
Oh, goodness. So, for a bit of context with dates, Security Breach released December 16th of 2021, and then Ruin was July, I want to say 25th of 2023. So it's a good chunk of time. Yeah. Gosh, what was my thoughts around then? I mean, I think that was really when the books and other, like, fan games and stuff really started to take center stage. Because when you have such a big drought with the games, that's where a lot of people turn to, is the books. I personally never got into the books. So honestly, for me, it was just kind of waiting around twiddling my thumbs.
Yeah. And it was also, like, a weird time in the fandom, too, because you're right. That was, like, the beginning of the most attention and hype the community has ever seen. It was the first, like, big, huge $60 game associated with this franchise. But it also wasn't super well received by the fandom at the same time. By the initial fandom. I would say overall most people were like, yes, this is a fun experience. But a lot of the, like, older fans were, like, very mixed for, they had their reasons.
Fair reasons.
I'm not going to deny that. Very fair reasons. But it was an interesting time where we had the most attention and eyes on the fandom, and a lot of the fandom didn't necessarily like the last game, and then that game had the longest time between it and another game.
If you want to, as a bit of a side tangent, talk about gaps in releases, I think a year that's often forgotten is the drought of 2017 during the lead up to Pizza Sim. Because if the new fans might not know this, to the lead up to Pizza Sim, we got no teasers. Scott was completely offline. He said he saw some Steam discussion board that was like, if Scott's really making another game, like, he can't just tease it like all the other games, like, that is getting old at this point. So throughout that entire year, in private, he worked on FNAF 6. He did not say anything to the community for, like, a full calendar year. So that drought was, that was abysmal back then, because that's when we were getting content after content after content, and then all of a sudden nothing. That was a rough one.
I kind of forgot about that, but yeah, you're right. Like there was a whole because again, for new fans who might not know, Scott was very online about these games, and not only were the games coming out frequently, but there were teasers for them on the website, and like it was always like a conversation almost.
Right.
And then we went cold turkey. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Not to mention, Pizza Sim finally comes out, and it starts like a troll game.
Right.
Which was like, intentionally or not, a great combination with that pause.
Yep.
Of after all this time we get a game and it's making pizzas and throwing them. And like everyone was like, huh? And then you get, the great reveal of the beginning of FNAF 6. That I do think the beginning of FNAF 6, as much as as middling as I find the gameplay of FNAF 6, the beginning and end of that game are probably as perfect as they could have been.
Right. Everyone talks about the ending. I don't see many people talk about the beginning, but it is impactful, especially back then.
Oh yeah, like the beginning of FNAF 6, I think better than any other FNAF game, grabs you and sits you down to play the game. Like that is a very compelling moment, and it has to do a lot with the render of Scrap Baby as well.
Oh yeah, those desk renders.
Oh yeah, which funnily enough, I love the models. Three of the four models in.
We don't talk about the fourth one.
We don't talk about the fourth one, and I admit the jump scares god awful in that game. Terrible jump scares in that game, awful. Meanwhile, for a game with only I guess technically 3 renders each of the animatronics, probably the best renders in the franchise. Like really well. The fact that Lefty looks as intimidating as he does, and he's ostensibly a colored, a differently colored Freddy Fazbear. That's really impressive.
Yeah, FNAF 6. There's a lot of people who are like, man, the Tycoon section's so good, but the rest of the, actual FNAF gameplay of it is so bad. And they kind of, really only focus on that. But when you get to the tiny details, I mean, Pizza Sim's a fantastic game.
I don't understand the night gameplay of Pizza Sim. I'll be straight up honest. I've just never been able to play it well. I can't do it. That being said, I do love FNAF 6. I think the way it's presented its lore is second to maybe FNAF 3, but those two being there on how you access the lore within the game are neck and neck. And I think FNAF 3 has one of the best ways to access its lore. And a big part of that comes from neither of them having death minigames, which I think are terrible and I hate them. So I think the only game that kind of pulled off death minigames well was Sister Location, and it's because there was one of them, and it was kind of fun to play. That's it.
And then at least that minigame wasn't, specifically for deaths. Later on, you unlock it in the extras.
Exactly, and that's a great point. If you had to beat that minigame to access Enter Night, but the only way to access it was dying, that would be abysmal. Because that minigame takes at least 50 tries to beat it on your first go-through. That's a hard minigame.
Without a walkthrough, I mean...
Oh, yeah. So the idea that you would have to access it by dying is crazy. So luckily, you can access it in the menu. And I think that's another point to it. Is one of the big reasons... I'm always beefing with FNAF 2. Any excuse to beef with FNAF 2, I'm taking.
I am not your guy to have on the pod for that.
But
I love FNAF 2.
Well, one of the reasons I beef with it is because of the death minigames. Without external sites, I don't think there's a good way to know you found everything in FNAF 2. And on one hand, I like that. Because on one hand, it's who knows what else I'm going to find. But as far as, that's good for Easter eggs. As far as, the lore minigames, I feel like you should be able to know, oh, hey, I found all of them. But I've got beef with that. We can get into that maybe another day. I could beef about FNAF 2 for a whole podcast with you.
I mean, honestly, I do think a lot of people say this to me, and it's probably true. A lot of my admiration for FNAF 2 is nostalgia. I understand.
Fair,
it's not...
but we're FNAF fans. Nostalgia is going to be a part of it no matter what.
Right,
Let's be real. No one's... Look, I might sit here and go, I love FNAF 1, but I'm not going to sit here and objectively say it's an amazing game. Okay? You know what I mean? I understand nostalgia is in that conversation. But yeah, FNAF 6 has always been... FNAF 6 and FNAF 4 for the longest time I had not understood the gameplay, and because of that, I didn't have fun playing it. Recently, I learned FNAF 4, so I'm planning on going back and trying to learn how to play FNAF 6, but I'm being told by several people that you just kind of pray, and that's how you beat the night modes.
I have some. If we're talking about beef, I got some beef with a one, not with a game, but with a human. A one David Barron.
Okay.
Because I did my research. I listened to the episode with him.
Yeah.
And you guys got talking about FNAF 6 mechanics, and he's like, "Yeah, you don't really, it doesn't really make any sense." But, and he brought it up. Maybe not the specific scenario, but there was a charity stream that he and Spiff did about speedrunning the games, and I did FNAF 6. And throughout my entire playthroughs, they were bashing on the way I played the game. But not only was I the one that died the least, maybe it took me a bit longer to get through the nights, but I died the least, and eventually I made it to all the endings. Maybe not the right endings, definitely messed up there.
You didn't, not the one that won, but
right.
all the other ones.
A little mistake on my end, but I knew what I had to do to keep the animatronics at bay. So there is a way. It takes a long time. Don't get me wrong. You're going to be sat there for like 20, maybe 30 minutes. But there is a way to go about FNAF 6.
I did love that FNAF 6, and I'm trying to think of ones, because I think my favorite was Glitched Attraction, but that's because I was playing. So FNAF 6 and Security Breach were probably the two that I really enjoyed watching for very different reasons. John flexing on Security Breach was very fun to watch, but just how neck and neck of like the FNAF 6 race was very entertaining to watch. Because there were like shootout leads, but something about those last two nights evened out every playing field. Right. And it was like, okay, I have no idea who's going to win, because someone's way ahead, but they might die 10 times, and I have no idea how.
Right. I think, was it Ellie and Oof? Oof Tree? Yeah.
I believe so.
Because I think eventually...
And then, like, Lump Percent started happening.
I was going to say, eventually I think Oof gave up a bit, but...
Yeah. Oh, because the playtime with Percy could have gone that way, too, because it was kind of in the same sense where, like, oh yeah, played the game correctly, where it takes longer to deal with some of the animatronics, but you won't die as often.
Right.
And I decided, I'm just not... I did the method of, okay, I'm just going to pretend he doesn't exist, and if I die, I die. And it worked out for me, but not guaranteed.
Yeah, that was a fun stream.
That was a really fun event. I hope that it happens again sometime. Maybe for 100. Hey, David, I'm holding you to it now.
Right.
So we talked about like the past and the present. What are your thoughts on the future of FNAF? And I know that's a really broad question, so we'll start small. The rest of this year, as far as confirmations go, we know the FNAF movie is going to start filming sometime this year, later. And we know that Into the Pit, don't have a release date, is a, quote, 10th anniversary game.
Right.
Do you... And we have a week before, the book coming out. What of, like, the things happening this year, kind of, are you excited for? Are you a bit worried or skeptical about? Is there something else you think might happen this year, just after talking about FNAF news and it's the way it works for so long?
I mean, ideally, there's murmurs and whispers about Help Wanted 2 DLC. Which I think if that is happening, I do think it'll be this year. At this point, I'm kind of shocked it hasn't been announced. But who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I think DLC makes a lot of sense for Help Wanted 2. I also wonder if they just, like, do a big patch and call it a day.
Right.
Because I could see that if they literally, like... I would love a DLC. If they just add, like, a couple endless modes, which probably isn't hard enough to warrant being DLC... then that would also be a great revitalization.
Right. I wouldn't also be shocked if they just skip to, like, that Carnival or Fall Fest thing that people have been talking about, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm very interested to see what that's going to be. I've heard some people say, and this is interesting, that Carnival is the DLC for Help Wanted 2.
I'd be a little disappointed.
And that would be Fall Fest. I've heard that, and I'm in the same boat where I'm like, I think that would kind of miss the point of what we would want out of a potential Fall Fest game.
Right. And I also, I would hate for it to feel a bit too similar to Dreadbear, like getting two kind of Fall Fest themed DLCs. Because I feel like the potential and the hype around the community with Fall Fest or Carnival, I mean, I feel like that's just got to be a full game. If they weren't thinking about it then, I hope they're at least thinking about it now.
Right, yeah. No, because it's been kind of the main mystery that's kind of driving people crazy is what the hell is it? You know, we keep getting mentions of it, and there's
it's clearly not just like a running gag or Easter egg.
Right, and there's clearly like themes that are being established, but without any information, they're doing a good job of giving us puzzle pieces without telling us what the picture is.
Right.
And hopefully, if they pull it off right, it might be a very satisfying game to be like, oh, okay, so this is Fall Fest. Wait a minute, that's like this thing and this thing and this thing, you know?
Right.
But that's going to be hard, and I don't think a DLC could satisfyingly pull that off. I think you're right in that.
I've noticed a theme. I've debated doing a video about this, but it seems more like your forte or some other theorist forte.
Sure.
I'm curious on your input if I do go about expanding this. I've noticed a theme about returning to the past, seemingly with these upcoming projects, because you've got Into the Pit, which is about going back in time with a ball pit, obviously.
Yeah.
You've got The Week Before, which is a FNAF 1 prequel story, and then supposedly you've got Carnival and Fall Fest, which is 1930s. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So it's debated.
I mean, sorry, not 70s.
70s. Well, I was going to say it's debated, right? Because I agree with you. The dates we have for Fall Fest are 1970 and 1983. However, I do agree that to the point that Fredbear's Sing and Show does look like a 30s, 40s, 50s kind of thing. So you could argue, but that's a much harder argument to make.
Right. I was just fascinated by seemingly this so many projects having correlation or relevance to returning to something in the past. So I'm curious if the future of FNAF is actually the past.
It's interesting. I mean, especially if they are sticking to their guns, and I hope they do, with what Help Wanted was trying to establish. The idea that, hey, those first 6, 7, 8 games, we respect their legacy. We are separating them and keeping them as reference, keep using them as reference, but we are going to specify some things moving forward.
Right.
And if they keep doing projects that relate to the past, I think that would be a good avenue to go down. Of like, okay, here's something that takes place around the same time, and we're specifying this detail. If it contradicts with FNAF 2 that happens at the same time, trust the new detail first.
Right.
And I think that a week before is a perfect time to do that. And then Into the Pit with the Missing Child incident is another great time to do that. Because the only information we have about the Missing Child incident in the games, as far as I'm aware, is the newspaper from FNAF 1.
Yeah, I think it's kind of been shelved off to the side since then.
Yeah, like, sure, you could argue Foxy Go 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 from FNAF 2 is another reference to the Missing Child incident. You can make that argument. But it sure doesn't tell us a lot, you know?
They're still dead.
They're still dead. They're really dead. I am curious about Into the Pit. Because I like, it's a game. I'm fully ready to be like, it's a game. It's fully in the continuity of the games. I am curious what changes they'll make from the book, if any. Especially the graphic novel.
Right. Well, hopefully not much from the graphic novel, because I've heard they're not super well adaptations, but I haven't read them, so don't quote me.
I've read the book, I've read the graphic novel for Into the Pit. And it's one of those things where, like, they definitely miss out on a lot of details, which you have to. It's a graphic novel. But then they stick with other details, which are very interesting. I'm going to look something up to make sure I'm not misquoting here.
Okay. I don't know if you've seen, but Mega Cat Studios, who, for those who may not know, is the developers behind the Into the Pit game, they released a teaser for April Fool's, which actually had a real Into the Pit teaser, but then they started replying to people with, like, references and quotes from the book, so people are like, oh, they've done their research. So I'm hoping... I'm hoping they have a lot of detail in the game.
Yeah, from what I've seen, they are doing a lot of direct references to the book, which is nice. I mean, it's a short story, right? Yeah. If you're going to make a game off of a short story and you don't keep it accurate, what was the point? It's 20 pages long. It's not hard to include all of it, you know?
Right.
One of the details that are really interesting about Into the Pit, and it's one of the details that a lot of people use to argue that it's not accurate to the games, is that when Oswald, our main character, is shown the bodies of presumably the missing child incident, right? It's 1985. Spring Bonnie shows him bodies of children in a back room. That's a missing child incident scene. In the book, it's written as half a dozen bodies lined up in chairs, which half a dozen is 6.
Yeah.
And then the graphic novel doubled down and has 6 kids there. So
I did not know that.
There's a couple options, right? Either, and this is my favorite option. I'll save my favorite option for the end. First option, it's just not accurate. And then it's like Silver Eyes, where some details are, some details aren't. Use it to help figure it out. Mm-hmm. Sure. That's an easy way out, kind of. It's like, sure, we can just work with it that way. There's the other option that there are 6 kids, and the FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 references to it are wrong, which would be a huge shakeup.
Yeah, I
mean, enormous shakeup.
That changes a bunch.
It changes a bunch, especially if that 6th kid is Charlie or Cassidy or someone else associated with those early deaths. That's a huge shakeup.
Mm-hmm.
There's the third option, and this one's my favorite. I don't know if it's the most accurate or correct. I just really think it's funny. People then went and pointed out there's like a whole Twitter thread of Scott just being bad at math. So there's a really good
I don't doubt
possibility
that, for a moment.
that he thought half a dozen was an understandable rounding down to 5. Not saying that he thought half a dozen meant 5, but that it was close enough.
There's a couple bodies somewhere.
It's like half a dozen
I
or
think
so.
they killed people. I don't know.
And look,
funny.
if you show me a room of 5 things from far away and say, quickly, how many are there? I'll say, I don't know, half a dozen. I get that.
Yeah.
But this is a really important scene, Scott. So I don't know. But if I recall correctly, the description from Into the Pit mentioned 5.
Mm-hmm.
So the game seems to be rectifying that. Or it's a spoiler if they say 6, you know.
Right.
Who knows? And apparently there's also multiple endings, which implies there's an ending of like, oh, you prevented the MCI from happening, which is interesting. I don't know. I'm really interested to see how they're going to go. Because a lot of people don't even think time travel is involved in that story. The ball pit is filled with agony. So some people have the theory, I'm not saying it's correct or incorrect, that he doesn't go back in time. He's having like an agony-induced hallucination while in the ball pit. He basically goes in and goes comatose. Which is an interesting angle, but like that's going to be a bad game, you know?
Yeah. Dream Theory Part 2, basically.
Essentially Dream Theory Part 2. But that's Into the Pit. A week before, that's newer news, and also it's coming out in like a month or two, right? Isn't that coming out in like June or something?
Off the top of my head, I cannot recall, but I can look it up quickly.
I can Google it because my question is going off to you. What are your thoughts on that? And like, are you excited for that? Kind of.
September.
What are your general vibe towards it?
So it comes out September 3rd.
Okay, so near the end of the year.
Right. I'm honestly like I said earlier, I've not read basically any of the Frights or Tales books besides the first book,
Sure.
Into the Pit. But like this might be the first book I'm genuinely looking forward to reading. You know?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting.
It not only is it a direct prequel to FNAF 1. Correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like that's the first time they've been like, "Hey, this is connected to the games."
Yeah, I think so. I mean, is there a direct, like, was there a line saying, like, this is directly connected?
Yeah, in the description, it's like, in this direct prequel to the first Five Nights at Freddy's game, you are the security guard, blah, blah, blah. So, and yeah, I mean, with all the theories about it being Phone Guy, like, I'm intrigued to see where it goes. And also, like, this is the first volume of a brand new interactive book series. So I'm curious what other stories they're going to make.
Yeah, inaugural book. That's really interesting. I would love, like, look, I've said it 1,000 times. I would love clear answers on whether or not the books are canon.
Right.
And if the clear answers are, here's a new series of choose your own adventure books that are, I'm down for it. And hey, it's still gonna be fucky for the lore because there's 25 endings.
Right.
So Scott can still keep it vague, but at least we can use the same ingredients. You know, we can argue with the same points of evidence now.
Right? You look at the description, the first line of the description, it's like, all right, directly connected to the games. And then you read a bit more, 25 endings. Crap, well, which one's right?
And when it comes out, Scott's going to tweet one sentence and saying, hope you guys enjoy the book. The ending is canon.
It's going to be like that
and
Tails comment he made.
Like, exactly. It's going to be whatever people are saying, yes.
Sure.
God, that was a week, huh?
For you theorists, I'm sure. For me, I was big chilling.
What a wild... I was literally sitting at like Denny's. It was like the one day that we were like, oh, let's take out the kids. It's nice out. It's like one of the first warm days. Let's go sit, eat some breakfast. It's on a Saturday. And I opened my phone. I've got 1,000 notifications. I'm like, okay, I'm going to see what that is later.
Boy, right on the weekend at Denny's?
At Denny's. I was trying to eat my pancakes.
You gotta eat the pancakes.
There were some good memes on that. I remember this meme. There's one meme. Sorry if anyone can hear. There's yard work happening around the house. That's why earlier I was like looking at the ceiling because the weed whack hit the side of the house.
Oh. In
a way that made it sound like there was like a hose spraying the ceiling above me. I'm like, what is going on? So if you can hear buzzing, there's yard work going on. But I remember there's a specific meme from that weekend where somebody was like, guys, I figured out exactly what Scott means. Look at this. And it was an infographic that had like 10 paragraphs of text deciphering his comment. And there was a moment where I'm like, man, we're getting in way, way too deep. But I'm so glad I'm like, okay, what's the conclusion? And then in reading it, I found out it was a bit where like the whole thing was essentially like a hypnosis text of the mimic trying to take over someone, because the conclusion was like, so in conclusion, you really need to get to the Pizzaplex quickly because I'm trapped in the basement and you need to help me. Like, yeah, that was a time. And then for anything else in the future, obviously, any hopes for, we're coming off of the back of some pretty big FNAF 2 movie news. So any hopes for that in particular? Because I know I'm so excited to see how they pull off Mangle. I thought they just weren't going to do it.
Right, yeah. A few days ago, just out of nowhere, I talked about this a bit, but I was just like at Walmart. I was just shopping at Walmart. All of a sudden, my phone's blowing up. I'm like, what could be so important? So I don't check it for a bit, but then when I do, of course, it's Jason Blum. Here's our first look, and I do genuinely believe his comment. I don't think he realized that was the Mangle. I don't think he realized how important that character reveal is. But that was crazy.
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing. I'm sure you don't, Jason. Because like I know he did good research for like FNAF 1.
Right. I'm not saying he's like
I'm sure I'm pretty sure that's probably where it stopped. Because it's like, oh, we'll do FNAF 2 when we get to it. You know?
Right.
No, that was great. And also Toy Bonnie in the corner. You know, kind of the same way that we got teasers for Freddy and Golden Freddy with FNAF 1 in that like Jim Henson workshop picture.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm really interested. Because they did Foxy very well. And that was the question for FNAF 1 is how do you pull off Foxy?
I think they had like 7 puppeteers for him, they said.
At least, yeah, around there.
They
and,
might need to hire
halfway
a few
through
more.
filming.
Oh my god. That was a story.
So I'm so intrigued on how they pull off Mangle.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't wait to make memes using the email from FNAF AR where they're like, I don't know how you guys want us to make Mangle crawl on the ceiling.
Right.
And then if that happens in the movie, I could just blast that email and be like, see, someone could do it.
I'm curious if at any point they're going to resort to CGI, because while there was a bit of CGI in the first one, like almost everything was practical. Like they did
almost
a
everything
phenomenal
I think
job.
like it was funny because I think like thinking back, I think people said the cupcake was the main usage of CGI for understandable reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that the cupcake also kind of did the most damage.
Right?
So
dude actually did the spring
curious. Yeah, I am curious to see what they will use for CGI in the second movie, and then how will that be proportional to the other animatronics?
Mm-hmm.
If I had to think about like what maybe would be necessary with CG, the cupcake makes sense again. But does Toy Chica have a cupcake?
Yep. Yeah, she has a cupcake.
She does? Okay. There was my brain is like I always think of like FNAF 1 cupcake and Funtime cupcake. I never think about FNAF 2 cupcake.
The
But
often
looking at
forgotten toy cupcake.
right, looking at it, I guess the reason I don't think about it is it kind of does just look like the FNAF 1 cupcake.
Yeah, not much of a difference there. Funtime
Pretty
really
much the
mixes
same
it up with
guy.
the sharp teeth.
Yeah, Funtime's much different comparatively, but yeah, like the toy cupcake I could see being a CGI thing, as well as like maybe the puppet, because I could see moving its arms believably could be difficult.
Yeah, because they're going to be pretty thin, pretty flimsy.
And, I mean, I guess they could literally marionette it around the set, but then will that look good?
They have like a
I don't know.
Random Encounters FNAF musical puppet where it's just like a tiny miniature on some strings.
Yeah. And then there's also the question. Now this is more lore focused, but I was sure because I correct me if I'm wrong. At some point in an interview, I swear I heard FNAF 2 is not going to be a prequel. It's going to be a continuation. I could be totally off the mark.
I think there have been reports that it's a sequel.
But
Actually,
not like a confirmation.
I wonder, because they did just reveal, for a bit of timeline news, CinemaCon just happened. They just revealed the movie releases in fall of next year, 2025. And
Yes.
in that, an article did release. I can't remember if they call it a sequel. I can quickly have a look, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's a sequel. I know I get a lot of comments that are like, oh, it has to be a prequel because it's FNAF 2 and it's got the Wizards and the Mangle and Puppet. Yeah, it does say a sequel, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is in the works.
All right. So yeah, because that is the question, right? Like if the toys are getting involved, are we just going, okay, this is fully its own separate thing, let's see where it goes? Or, you know, or are the toys only going to be used in like flashbacks? That's a very interesting, like, the fact that if it was just Mangle, I'm like, okay, maybe Mangle is still around.
Right.
You know, I could see that. But the fact that Toy Bonnie is there too is very interesting. And it's like, okay, in this universe of the movies, is new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza being opened today?
Right.
That's really interesting.
I think my timeline in theory is, this is roughly how I think it's going to go. I'm curious your input. I think at some point Freddy's does reopen, and that's where they bring in the toys and, oh no, Mangle and the puppets there. Or maybe it's already open because of the end credit scene. But I think since Abby has such a strong connection with those spirits, I'm curious if she's going to be like, hey, Mike, there's more kids out there. We got to go help them. Because how would it be a prequel? Like, it can't be a prequel if we're bringing back Josh Hutcherson as Mike and Abby and Vanessa. Because they learned about FNAF.
Do we have casting confirmations yet besides loosely Matthew Lillard?
I believe Josh has said in interviews that they are working on it.
Okay. Because that's a big point. Like, if Josh Hutcherson is coming back, ostensibly it has to be a sequel.
And like, let's be real, you can't just not bring back Josh.
Right.
Like, I think from a business point of view,
media darling.
Right.
And also making his grand return to being a Scream Queen, and I'm very hyped for it.
Right.
Same with Matthew Lillard. I'm so happy he gets to be like having fun in a horror role. Because I think he even said at like a convention that this was like he's been wanting to get back into horror since not doing it for so long.
Right.
And this has been a great way to to get back into it. Because I remember there was some Twitter post where it was like, I wonder what Matthew Lillard thinks about all the new like FNAF fans thirsting over him as William Afton. And the first response was like, do you not realize who he played in Scream?
Right.
Matthew Lillard is very used to online gays thirsting for him in a horror movie, okay?
Yeah.
It's not changing now.
As a massive Scream fan, I was like, because everyone wanted Willem Dafoe, but as a massive Scream fan, the second I saw Matthew, I was like, oh, that's perfect. Oh, he's been wanting this, you know?
I'm not like, I like Scream. I'm not like a huge Scream fan. I'm a huge Matthew Lillard fan. So I was in the same boat. I'm like, oh, that's great casting. That's perfect.
Shaggy himself, come on. The memes were perfect.
It's literally, I can be your Shaggy or your, oh God, what's the character's name in Scream?
Stu.
It's Stu. I can be your Shaggy or I can be your Stu. It's perfect. Yeah, no, I'm thankful that it's releasing next fall. Take your time with it. We do not need these rushed. We've waited. That was like with the first movie. It's like we waited 8 years for the first movie.
Yeah.
We can wait a couple years for the second. Okay.
If it seems like, I mean, reportedly the script was already being written like when the first film released. And
Yeah, I think so, especially after like the release weekend of FNAF. Like, yeah, start writing that script.
I think they realized, definitely didn't realize it during the lead up, but when that film released, they realized, oh shoot, this is big.
Yeah,
You know,
The
so
fact
let's
it
lock
did
in.
that- yeah, the fact it did that well with a simultaneous streaming release is crazy.
Right?
That's nuts.
And Blumhouse and Universal, hey, imagine how much more money you'll make if you just release it in theaters full next time.
right now you're not worried about it. Although I will say, if you want to release it simultaneously, I'm not going to be super mad because it did make making the Easter egg video a lot easier.
You got a point. Yeah, I think that they said that's the main reason, so people could go back and see the Easter eggs.
Yeah, and that makes sense because they know how online this community is.
Right.
So giving the community an opportunity to rewatch it online and content creators an opportunity to talk about the thing it was the right move.
Yeah.
But that being said, I would be really curious to see how it does just in theaters.
Mm-hmm. I think at CinemaCon, when they revealed like the release window, I obviously wasn't there, so I don't have a direct quote. But it was interesting that the article that released did call out. They didn't state if it was theatrical or day and date again. So I am curious which way they're going to lean.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's a trend with FNAF is not giving us important information until the last second.
Right.
Hey, Steel Wool, next time let us know if it's releasing on PC at the same time. Thank you.
Oh my goodness.
The month-long lead up to, there's a chance I'm not playing the new FNAF game was crazy.
God, I remember in my news videos, I'm like, Chat, I don't know if I can release it. I'm not buying a PS5. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, that was the thing. Like, I'm like, look, I am blessed the channel is doing well. I'm not blessed enough to drop $1,000 to play a FNAF game, okay? I'm not buying a PS5 and a PSVR 2 to play this game.
I feel so bad because I know Spiff and MatPat both bought PlayStation VR 2 specifically for a Mystic Hippo, and you buy it and it's basically just like
it's just a tech demo.
Okay, like what's the point?
And part of me is like, I'm actually I'm happy in one hand that like they didn't lock really important content behind that. But at the same time, I do, like you said, I feel bad for people who are like, well, I need the very important content, and it's just a tech demo.
There must have been something in their contract with Sony.
I'm sure, especially with all the free press. Well, I'm sure it's not free, but all the huge press that Sony's giving them with the State of Play trailers.
Right.
So I'm sure there's some give and take there. And I'm sure Help Wanted 2 sold units. Like, I guarantee you a large amount of people were like, well, I've got a PS5. I might as well get the PSVR 2 to play this game.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, good on them because Help Wanted 2, look, not as scary as Help Wanted 1. I'll be the first to admit it. Way more fun of a video game.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a fun video game.
Oh, yeah. I've gone back countless times just offline. I'm like,
yup.
I kind of want to play Help Wanted 2. You know?
I want to do some food prep. Get me in there. You know?
I'll be my own custom chef.
Like I said, Steel Wool, endless mode for food prep, endless mode for Phaser Blast. That's all I'm asking for. A lot of them could benefit from an endless mode. Those are my two. Once I learned how Phaser Blast FNAF 2 worked, I could be in that game for hours.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
so fun.
It's just a blast.
No pun intended. A Phaser Blast. On that note, we
Clean segue.
Clean segue to, we've been talking about FNAF for about 45 minutes. It's about that time to go on questions. So if you want any questions talked about on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is, of course, in the description to copy and paste it because it's a pain to type out. Trust me, I know. I do it every week. But you can also submit questions via Spotify. Admittedly, I forget to check those a lot, but I do check them.
But you can submit questions still.
But you can do it, and I will eventually. Less people submit them on Spotify, so statistically, you're more likely to get your questions seen there. However, our first question comes from StarJ, he, him. What are your thoughts on indie horror games deciding to make books to possibly understand the lore of the series? Thank you for your question, StarJ. I've got a lot of thoughts on this, especially because, I don't know if anyone watched last week's episode, there was some technical difficulties. I actually did answer this last week, but part of the technical difficulties is we lost that section of the footage. So I'm going to talk about it again today. So I've got some thoughts, but what are your thoughts on a lot of indie horror games kind of making books to help better understand the lore of their series?
I mean, as someone who has read every single book, obviously it's a topic.
Of course.
I mean, I think as long as it's not super important lore, like I feel like as long as it's not a necessity, it's fine. I have no problem with it. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a trend that FNAF started, and now you're seeing Hello Neighbors doing it. Poppy Playtime's getting basically their own survival logbook / Freddy Files.
which I'm genuinely very excited for.
Yeah, I think they released a few previews. It looks a little basic, but I'm curious to see how they go about that. And then you got Bendy.
Yeah, the
Probably
book.
Garten Ben eventually.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, they'll have to probably make it a picture book, so it's relative to the fan base. But
It's a pop-up picture book.
It's a pop-up picture book with some. I say that, but like one of the most important lore books for FNAF is literally an activity book. So I mean, who the hell am I?
And we've gotten like what 3 coloring books at this point.
Yeah. But no, I think I generally agree with you, right? I think books are an amazing opportunity for you to flesh out niche details of your story that don't work well in a game. And that's great. The bad part can come in if those books are then necessary to understand parts of the franchise. And I think a lot of people felt that, especially with Ruin. A lot of people felt blindsided by the Mimic. And sure, if you're reading all of the books, you kind of are primed to expect a Mimic type thing in the games. I'd argue, and maybe this is an unpopular opinion, maybe it's a hot take, I don't think you need the books for the Mimic's reveal to be satisfying. I think a lot of people have been over-exaggerating how out of nowhere the Mimic felt. I don't think it felt out of nowhere. I think the lack of Burn Trap maybe feels out of nowhere, and it's like, okay, what's going on there? But I feel like the game itself, very well established, Gregory isn't really down there. So I don't think that reveal, like, well, it's the Mimic, I think that does make sense in retrospect. Maybe people were, I don't know. I read the book, so I don't have a good bias-free answer for that. I personally feel like the game itself set that up decently enough.
Well, as someone who didn't read the books, but still had kind of base level, not like I knew the Mimic existed. I knew it was kind of general deal. But like you said, throughout the game, I was able to pick up, oh, wait, that's a recycled line. And it's not like, oh, they re-recorded it. No, that's the same line. Almost as if it's like a recording or something. So there are definitely points in the game that lead you to realize this isn't actually Gregory.
Yeah, and then especially you get further down, even if you hadn't picked up on that, I feel like by the time of essentially right before the reveal, when you get the Roxy Raceway lines of Gregory, if you're hearing that and you assume it's Gregory, that's your fault. That's on you. It was literally help me. Come on.
And it's already such a weird premise. Why would our assuming he's a human or whatever, 7-year-old friend invite his other 7-year-old friend to an abandoned gigantic mega pizzaplex? Why wouldn't he just call the police or whatever? So already it's kind of a dodgy circumstance.
And I think before we had any clue about the Mimic, but we had I think I could be mixing up my timeline because it was within a few months, but I swear we got the Ruin poster before we knew anything about the Mimic. I could be wrong.
Ruin poster.
It's close. Ruin poster, I want to say, was a year before Ruin.
I want to say May. May's jumping out at me.
When did Tales from the Pizza? Because, to be fair, the epilogues involved the Mimic pretty early on. Hey, this one's my bad. Another technical difficulty. Apparently, at some point, my microphone muted. I don't know when that happened. So there's a chance the rest of this episode doesn't happen. But there's a chance it does. And there's just, hopefully, maybe just 20 minutes of missing footage that just doesn't see the light of day. I don't know.
If you're seeing this, it's a miracle.
If you're seeing this, I got really lucky. That being said, we've got one more question from the Mimic. From Lowell. They, them. One more question. What's your favorite FNAF song?
As someone who's listened to every single... I can't even fake it. I admittedly do not listen to many, if any, FNAF songs, really. Okay.
Then I guess, what's the one you've listened to and liked? We'll go there.
I guess recently, I usually try to keep up with what Daco's releasing. I think he's the only music creator that I kind of actively check out. I did like Behind the Mask, which was Daco's FNAF movie song, if I remember correctly.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, you can never go wrong with a classic Living Tombstone.
Sure. Living Tombstone's obviously a pinnacle, or like a pillar of the community. My answer is clear cut in stone. One of my favorite YouTube music artists, one of my favorite musicians in general, the Stupendium.
Oh.
And the Stupendium made a Security Breach song called Pizza the Action.
I've heard
Every
of that
time
one.
I've asked this question, it's the first song that comes to mind. That song goes unbelievably hard. Because admittedly, and Stupendium admits it themselves, their first FNAF song is pretty okay. Their second FNAF song is a little bit rough around the edges. But Pizza the Action, they knocked out of the park. Just generally a great song, and also a great FNAF song.
I do remember listening to their... It must have been Help Wanted 1, because it had a whole bunch of characters. That was very fun, because it had a lot of characters singing.
That was the one that a lot of people are like, it's good, it's a little messy, but it is good.
And I did just remember Moving Up in the World Tonight by DA Games. That's a bop.
Oh, yeah. I kind of forgot about that one.
Because it's that song I don't like, personally, when songs are super, like, apparently FNAF songs. Like, I think Will, in particular, has a very good mix of them still being FNAF songs, but also at the same time, it's not like, well, here we are, I'm Freddy Fazbear, you know?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Because it's also like the same attitude I take towards merchandise from a fandom, where if I were, especially wearable merchandise, from like clothing based off of fandom.
Right.
My favorite kind of clothing based off of fandom is subtle. It's something that it looks really good as clothing, but if you're in the fandom, you recognize it. I think that's the perfect way that fandom... For me, that's my preferred type of fandom clothing. And I agree with you in the same way with the FNAF music and just fandom songs in general. If you can make a really damn good song that is also a FNAF song or your fandom song, that's the way to go.
With merchandise, I especially love how I feel like every single Hot Topic t-shirt, like, it can have a banging design, but then it'll just throw on Five Nights at Freddy's text on it, or it'll have some, like, cringy tagline. You know?
That's I like the one of my favorite kinds of like merchandise for fandoms for clothing are the ones where it will like reference an in-universe brand and then just look like a piece of merchandise from that, and it blends in a lot better. You know what I mean? Or I mean, you can also go the route of just making a dope design, like that fucking Springtrap shirt from Hot Topic recently.
Right.
That I forget the artist's name.
Turntail.
But they're yes. I don't know if I'd wear it, but I'd get a fucking poster of it. That's a sick design.
So
you know
hard.
what I mean?
It is so
such
hard.
a good design.
Thankfully,
and that's why
I was just going to
Sorry,
say,
go on.
Trends International is making posters of some of Turntail's designs.
Nice.
So thank you, Trends.
I would love a poster of that. And then like the speaking of the FNAF 2 teaser picture, hopefully, I don't know, we'll find out. But we mentioned that earlier, the FNAF 2 movie teaser with Jim Henson shop. The fact that he's wearing the Springtrap shirt, everyone's like, okay, interesting. So
that's also another Turntail design.
That's going on the vision board, you know?
Yeah, that's why Hex has been releasing, or at least teasing, some of their upcoming shirts, and they're all in universe. Like, oh, this is like what an employee of Afternoon Robotics would wear for a sister location, or you know, security breach,
like a
touring band.
Yeah, or like a even like literally a security baseball hat. You know what I mean? Like the hat. Done. I don't need like a big old like Freddy Fazbear face on my baseball cap. You know?
Right.
But yeah, so as far as those are our favorite, in a roundabout way, there's your answer, lol. But thank you for your question. And hopefully this podcast episode happens. I don't know. Apparently I muted my microphone halfway through. Or sometime. I don't know when it happened. I just noticed it did. So we'll find out.
If it's lost footage, we'll just upload my section, which is just me talking to myself.
It'll just be if it's lost footage, I'll upload your section, but I'll face your camera pointed at a brick wall, so it's just you talking to a wall.
You duplicate my face cam, and I can add like voiceover.
Well, I know my microphone wasn't muted for the beginning of this podcast. So the other option is either we release like a 20-minute episode, if it's bad, we release a 20-minute episode, or the third option is we release the podcast episode in full, and for an unspecified amount of time, I am replaced with a brick wall. So we'll figure it out. Something will happen. But thank you again for being here. Do you have any projects coming up down the pipeline coming soon, or just anything you want to shout out in general, besides, obviously, your channel's already linked?
Yeah, well, if you want to stay up to date with all the FNAF news, feel free to subscribe. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Rytos. Been loving the theories recently.
Well, jeez.
Jeez. I do have, hopefully soon, a FNAF award show called The Fazzies coming up. It's been taking a long time.
I forgot about that. That's coming up soon.
I don't forgive you for it. I don't. What's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know. I will say I just generally do have a very bad memory. So if it's not happening in the next 2 days, it's not in my mind.
It has been taking
I write down
a
lot
long
of things.
Time. I do not.
Things doing things well takes a long time. So, well, even that, like I said, literally, I don't know. There's pages I can't show here because it's like stuff that's coming up. But I've got literally every guest I'm planning to get on the podcast that I haven't asked yet on a piece of paper right here, because if I don't write down their name, I will forget they exist. And that's not to say like, oh, I'm gonna forget. No, literally, it like Doggo's on that list, and I don't think I'll ever be able to get him. Who knows? He's a very busy guy. But
Doggo's there.
If I don't write his username down, I will forget. And it's not like I'm gonna forget Dog. You know what I mean? Like it's the one track mind. It's the ADHD.
Right.
So I've got like literally 6 different pieces of paper off to the side over here. That's like people you should ask, people you have asked, people you have confirmed. Like just for the
people
podcast.
You should not ask, just in case. Case you get that thought.
One big piece of paper on the wall that in all caps just says David Barrett again now.
Written across all your walls, David Barrett.
Yeah, that's the separate room where I go when I need to vent. That's a. But thank you again for being on the podcast, and we'll hope to see you again sometime. But for all of you listening at home, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities and sometimes the possibility of an episode happening is endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye bye for now.